Chat, this time there's not even a need to lie to the YouTube frogs because it's going to be an actual tier list Tuesday. Can you believe it? Probably gonna upload it on a Wednesday just to throw them off. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna talk about some of these decks, some older decks, some decks from Legacy of Destruction. I want to give you guys a little bit of an update of what I think of these cards and decks for the upcoming national season. Keep in mind, once again, that this is going to be a first impression. Right? I've taken a look at YCS Raleigh results. I've taken a look at YCS Rio results. Italian Open first week of Legacy of Destruction has passed. I've experimented with some of these cards myself, not all of them, but I want to give you guys my first impression of some of these decks. Now, not everything is going to be included. If I'm missing some of the stuff, ask me in the comments of what I think of any deck. I did remove some decks that were previously in the tier list just to keep it a little bit shorter because I added a lot of new stuff from Legacy of Destruction. So feel free to comment down below what you think of the list, and if there's a deck missing and you would like to know my opinion, feel free to comment that as well. Without further ado, let's talk and discuss some of these decks. Ashened, I'm in the same boat as most people. I am slightly disappointed by Ashened. It was a deck that I had high hopes for. I don't know why I had high hopes for it, because it is a TCG exclusive archetype, and the history of TCG exclusive archetypes, you would think that we shouldn't have high hopes in it, but at the same time, we always find different reasons to cope on it. My reason this time was, hey, the artwork is so dope and they put so much effort into the trailer and the artworks and so on and so forth. Surely they're going to make this one nice. And this is going to be surprising. I think Ashened is surprisingly above average for a TCG exclusive archetype. However, above average for TCG exclusive archetype still means it's not great. The deck is okay, I think. I made this category that I called rogue/small events. Those are decks that I personally think if you enjoy them, you really want to play them. I think they are good enough to like take to locals. Maybe perform at a regional if you have some good luck and really know what you're doing, but really not more than that, right? This is a category where I'm going to put a lot of decks that if they're your pet deck, if you really want to try them, they're going to be completely okay. And I think Ashened is one of those decks. I think Ashened cards, even though they're not good enough, they are functioning, right? They give you, I think now, somewhat of a cohesive strategy. It's not a good deck, but it's fine to play at locals, I think. Heroes are an okay deck at the moment. I think they are definitely better than Ashened. I don't know if they have more potential than that. For that, I would actually have to play the deck more. I did order myself the cards because I wanted to try Heroes with 3 Malicious, but I don't know if it's good enough or if I expect it to be good enough to put it into the potential category. Maybe it's fine to put it here because the potential category is kind of for those scenarios where I don't really know if a deck is playable. And I think Heroes is a deck where I'm not certain where it goes. I guess I'll leave it there. I'll leave it at the bottom of this category. I think that's okay. Ragnaraika is a deck that I haven't looked at much, so take this opinion with a grain of salt. My first impression of the deck is that it's okay. It had 0 impact in the OCG, so I have a hard time putting it any higher than like here. But I will say that kind of link climbing combo deck is like really badly positioned in the OCG because of Max C. In the TCG, there is like some chance that you can cook something up with it and maybe do okay with it. From the first wave, I don't think it's quite good enough yet. Branded is a good deck. I do want to emphasize that when I'm putting a deck in good, because technically most of these decks in the grand scheme of Yu-Gi-Oh decks are pretty good decks to even appear in this tier list, right? There's a lot of nuances even when I call a deck good here. So for Branded, they didn't really suffer anything on the Forbidden and Limited list. They still have the Gimmick Puppet lock. They still are pretty damn strong if they resolve Branded Fusion. But here's the caveat. Branded randomly suffers from another deck in the format right now, and that's Tenpai. So far, most of the people are citing Dimensional Barrier as an answer to Tenpai Dragon. That card cooks Branded alongside, like, it's a hand trap format where everyone is playing Ash, but that's usually the case. You can kind of deal with that, right? You can play answers to Ash and maybe there's some hands that can play through it, yada yada, but you still don't enjoy getting Ashed. Obviously, you really hate getting debarriered. I think Branded is still a good deck, but it's gonna go towards the bottom of this good category for me. Tenpai Dragon. Now, I'm gonna throw Tenpai Dragon in meta defining. Even though it is a deck that I personally don't like. And I've said this in the past, I'm not a big fan of Tenpai Dragons. I don't think it is a insanely good choice, especially for good players. I think Tenpai doesn't give you a lot of skill expression in the games because it's relatively linear. It's just like you go second, you either try to hand trap your opponent or board breaker your opponent and then resolve a very linear 1 or 2 card combo to go for an OTK. And it's very dependent on your opponent to have the answers or not have the answers. That's a thing that I really don't like when I'm playing a deck that doesn't give me the opportunity to really outplay my opponent, and it is really at the mercy of my opponent respecting or not respecting it in deck building or drawing or not drawing the out to my strategy. I'm not a big fan of that. However, the deck is still, despite Trident Dragon requiring a lot of money or a really good friend, the deck is still really cheap, relatively easy to play and build, and that is what makes it a meta-defining force, because there's going to be a lot of people playing it. It is still really strong. Only because I don't like some of the dynamic it creates doesn't mean it's not a strong deck, because what happens if you don't draw that D barrier? They just destroy you a lot of the time. Even the Snake Eye decks that put in like Pucho or Lyrilusk Nightingale against it, if they get hand trapped a bunch of times, you still lose, right? Like if you can't get to the rank 1 Xyz, can't do anything about it. The deck is going to be meta defining by sheer popularity, right? Like you're going to have to respect Tenpai in your deck building. But if enough people do, if everyone knows how to maneuver around Tenpai cards, if people put stuff against it in their side decks, then the deck is not going to be as successful as it could be if people don't expect it. Centurion, I think, is a rogue deck in this format. Even though it got slight support in Legacy of Destruction, the support that they got really wasn't what the deck was hoping for, I think. They still have Calamity, so it is scary. The problem with Centurion is it's not the best at playing through hand traps, and guess what? The best decks in the format play a lot of hand traps. I still think Centurion has potential in the grand scheme of things. There could easily be a format in the future where Centurion comes back and is actually like a good deck. Right now though, when like you look at the top decks in the format playing a lot of hand traps into your deck that has a lot of 1-card starters with not that many extenders, it's really hard to really pilot Centurion. You can, it's not terrible, it's still good, it's a solid rogue deck. Well, I'm putting it to the very top of this category, but I just don't think it's in an ideal spot right now. As a hero player, the deck is not better than Centurion. See, I didn't say that it is. The potential category does not mean the decks in here are better than these down here. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to Centurion. I've played Centurion, I understand Centurion very well, and I'm classifying it as a rogue deck. Hero is a deck that I attest potential to for maybe it's better, maybe it's worse. Got it? Okay, let's talk about Snake Eyes together. Talk about Fire King. Fire King is weird. Fire King Snake Eye is an incredibly powerful deck, probably better than any other deck on this list except for Pure Snake Eye. So theoretically, if we go by sheer power level, I should be putting it here. The problem is, if you have access to the Snake Eye cards, you should almost always be playing Pure Snake Eye. And so I'll put it in good, simply because if you look at, for example, YCS Rio results, Pure Snake Eyes has eclipsed Fire King Snake Eye in every shape or form. In terms of what you're expecting to play against and what you should prepare your deck for, it's definitely Pure Snake Eye. You should be focusing on Pure Snake Eye. There's been a lot of funny ideas on how to beat specifically Fire Kings, like cards like Soul Release or whatever, Cosmic Cyclone, really good cards against Fire King Snake Eyes, but not very good against Pure Snake Eyes. And I don't want to make the impression as if those cards were good choices right now, because for those reasons, they are not that good of a choice, right? So if I threw the deck up here, you might get the impression like, hey, I need to prepare for Fire King Snake Eye. You really don't. There's not that many. And for the most part, the cards that are good against Snake Eye are also good against Fire King Snake Eye, but not vice versa, right? As far as Pure Snake Eyes goes, let me say a word or two about them. You can play Kashtira cards in it. You can play Jet Synchron lines in it. You can play Melodius cards in it. That's also a deck that got second at YCS Rio and top 8. All of those versions are good, and I think they only have very marginal differences, to be honest with you. They function almost the same way. The engines also have very similar purposes, right? Like you play Kashtira cards to bait hand traps. You play Melodius cards to bait hand traps and have like more starters and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, the reality is if you resolve your your combo. It doesn't matter if you go Omega Dispatter. It doesn't matter if you go Appaloosa plus Hope Harbinger with the new level 8 Snake Eye. It doesn't matter if you put up some Melodius bodies to make a bigger Appaloosa or whatever. In reality, most of the time, because most decks in the format play a lot of hand traps and no board breakers, if you actually get to make a board and they play no non-engine to break it, you win the game. And even against Tenpai, it's kind of similar, honestly, because most Tenpai decks also play a lot of hand traps. So if you can get through those hand traps and still make a very respectable board, you can probably deal with the field spell with like IP into SP and then be fine. Floowandereeze, I'll throw it here. It has consistency issues, but I think a shifter deck is solid. One deciding factor in whether I think Floowandereeze is actually like bottom of good or rogue is its Tenpai matchup. Like, how is the Tenpai matchup? They can't beat Empen. I'm not sure. If it's a good matchup for Flu, then I think it's a solid deck. It's the same as always. Step 1, don't brick, which is honestly the hardest step when you play Flu. Step 2, shifter auto wins. Step 3, deck is still pretty good if it doesn't brick and go first. So like, it's overall, I think it's a solid deck. Similar to Tenpai, I don't like the dynamics of Floowandereeze. A lot of stuff that the player has no control over, whether you brick or whether you draw shifter, right? That's the sort of stuff that I personally don't like relying on, but I still think it's a solid deck. I hate to say it, but it is what it is. Kashtira, kind of in the same boat. I personally think I would rather play Flu than play Kashtira, because Flu just seems a little more unfair in what it does. I'm also comparing them when they don't draw shifter. Like, if Floowandereeze goes first and draws like Robina, even if they don't have shifter, they can still feel pretty strong. Kashtira is like, if they don't have shifter, I feel like you can break their board relatively easily. Labrynth is a good choice still. Labrynth is going to be one of your decks with a better Tenpai matchup. Maybe that makes me want to put it here. And against Snake Eyes, it's like, all right. We saw Labrynth get second place at YCS Raleigh. It's as good as ever, pretty much. Karma Cannon is really good against Tenpai Dragons. D-Barrier is obviously really good against Tenpai Dragons, and you can access it. The deck is not super weak to a lot of the common hand traps in the format. That's the main difference between a deck like Branded and Labrynth right now. I'm actually gonna throw Lab over Branded, because like both are like tier 2 decks that are playable, but one of them is good into the cards that people are playing, which is Lab. Branded is rather mediocre into the non-engine that people are playing. This is probably my favorite thing out of Legacy of Destruction, and that is the new Lightsworn stuff. I'm gonna throw this way up here. I think the Lightsworn cards have great potential. I personally played them with Runick at my locals last week, and the deck felt really good. I made a deck profile for that. If you haven't seen it yet, it's on the YouTube. I realized that I'm being biased towards a Runick deck once again, so I'm putting it in potential, okay? I'm not putting it in good or meta defining. Calm down. I think the Lightsworn cards themselves are incredibly strong cards. Whether you put them in Runick or in some other deck, I played with those cards and I was just, there has to be a way to make these cards like good, right? Like, one Dragonling creates a lot of card advantage. Milling is like historically good in a lot of different strategies in Yu-Gi-Oh! I think there's very, very solid potential to this archetype. Whether this is the right format for it, maybe, maybe not. I think it's hard to say whether I would attest these cards the biggest chances to really do well right now, but they are very good cards, I think. Melodius is something that, I'll admit it, until like a couple days ago, I wasn't even going to include Melodius in this. Like, I just glanced over those cards in Legacy of Destruction, and that's my bad, honestly. I should have taken a closer look at them, apparently, because currently the Melodius cards are really popping off. At Regionals, Italian Open, YCS Rio, Melodius cards are everywhere. Not everywhere, but like very well represented. And that is in two ways. The pure Melodius deck, which is putting up some results, but still impressive. And then there's the Melodius package in, for example, Snake Eyes. One Ostinato is like full Snake Eye combo without normal summoning and all that kind of stuff. Voiceless Voice is another deck that can play them. So the Melodius cards are good. Pure Melodius, I would probably throw right around here, but I think Melodius stuff is really good. The stuff has really impressed me with its performance in the first weekend. I really think it's worth taking a look at. I don't know if that means I should throw it in the very top of potential or if it's confirmed good already. This feels more accurate because I feel like at this point, something like Lightsworn still have to be proven to be good. I think the Melodius stuff has already proven to be good because it's not like one Melodius that topped somewhere. It topped YCS Rio, it topped the Italian Open, it topped Regionals, it got second place at YCS Rio. I feel like it's confirmed that it's good and a thing. I feel like Memento is the first one I'm going to throw here. but this is not definitive. This is something that could still work out. I think Memento, with the next wave of support from Infinite Forbidden, I think it's going to move up. I think it's going to be okay. Maybe even better than okay. The new fusion card that they're going to get is actually insane. But I don't think the deck has quite what it takes yet. It doesn't really have the right end board yet for it to work out. But I think the Infinite Forbidden set is going to change that. I only included Orcust because Harp just came back and because Ben got second place at the Berlin Regional with it, clearly showing that the deck can do okay at smaller events. The event wasn't even that small. It was over 200 players. I think Orcust still doesn't get more than this from me. I think it's a very fun deck, and that's the good news. If you want to, you can definitely play it at like locals or regionals. Like if you just really enjoy it. Like the decks down here, you really need a good reason to play them, right? Your reason to play Orcust is not, I think Orcust is the best deck. Your reason to play Orcust is you like Orcust and you want to play Orcust, and if you build it well and if you play it well, I think the deck is okay. Purrely I don't like for a couple of reasons. Ding Kang Pham is not gonna like what I'm about to say. I don't think Purrely is very well positioned in the format at the moment. They did get a boost from the second Delicious, but at the same time, I just don't see how the deck is meant to perform in this environment. It seems incredibly hard to play Purrely into a lot of hand traps, into a lot of Ghost Ogres as well, into Dimensional Barrier. Even if people didn't play those cards, Purrely would probably just be somewhere in good, but people are playing those cards and they are incredibly good against Purrely. Plus the deck has a big issue when it comes to time because of paying 500 for my friend Purrely and being a relatively slow deck. I'm throwing it here. I'm sorry, Purrely community. I don't think right now is the time. Runick. I feel like I can't even talk about Runick anymore without being made fun of. Dude, what can I say? I feel like Runick has potential. They're good cards though. Okay, a couple of things. Hear me out. Hear me out. There's a couple of different ways you can play Runicks. One way that is unfortunately good is Runick Stun. In case you were wondering, Runick Stun I think is a playable deck in the format, unfortunately. Don't get me started on Runick Thunder Dragon, please. Never mention that again, ever. Runick Plunder, I would say, is a solid rogue deck. Per Hire Spright is probably also a solid rogue deck. Runick Bestial and Runick Lightsworn, I think, are between potential and good. I think those decks are solid right now. Like, Bestials are well positioned into this format. Bestials are good into Labrynth. Bestials are good into Branded. Bestials are good into Snake Eyes, which is ironic because it's a fire deck, but like banishing IP Masquerena is really powerful. The Bestial cards are very valuable. I think Bestial Runick is still a force to be reckoned with, and I think the Lightsworn Runick deck has a ton of potential. And that's all I'm gonna say about Runick without being made fun of, okay? Well, yeah. The Shining Sarcophagus archetype, I just wanted to include it for completion's sake. I think it's meh. You can play it with Runicks. Oh, well, then it's at least up here then. Nah, I don't know. When I read them, and I read them for a second time last week, I didn't think they sounded that great, but that is my impression. If you want to try it and maybe see if it's good enough to take down a locals, go for it. But I personally don't think they're that great. Pure Sky Striker is probably here, unironically. Pure Sky Striker is just not a great deck. What I want to talk about is Sky Striker as an engine, and I think that one has potential. It's already seen some success. I've seen various different decks using the Sky Striker cards. I obviously played a Board Breaker Snake Eyes version before. That one was actually quite fun and solid. I've seen people put them in Tenpai because, you know, just a lot of power spells, Board Breakers, and then engages to draw extra cards. I think that's also something you could consider. They're just solid cards, I think. Tearlaments, I'll throw in potential for two reasons. The first reason is that I think there is something if you pair them specifically with Lightsworn. That one I could see. The other thing is like the third Malicious in some Beatrice spam version could also be okay. But I think the old school, like from the last couple formats, Tearlament decks, I would probably put in Rogue because of the potential pairing with Lightsworn cards. That deck, you could mess around with it. One Lightsworn Dragonling, if you can set it up, is like mill 4 cards with Minerva and then make a zombie vampire. So it mills 8 cards. I think that is a version of the deck that can have some potential. I was pleasantly surprised and impressed by some of Yubel's showings in regional events. It hasn't done anything at YCS events. I personally think the deck is like here until we get the new fusion. With the new fusion though, it probably goes here. It already works. It already does work. I'm not putting it in bad. It's a playable deck, but I don't think it's that good without the new fusion. And then also, you guys are saying it beats Tenpai. There are a bunch of extra deck tools for Tenpai to beat Yubel, and the people are playing those already. It's a solid deck. I don't think it's better than the ones up here, though. I think there is a difference between the decks that I put in good and the Yubel deck still. Voiceless Voice, I think I'm going to throw here. Voiceless Voice is like the definition of a good tier 2 deck. One cool thing about Voiceless Voice is that a lot of its cards are starters and extenders at the same time. It's really good at playing through hand traps because of that. It doesn't have crazy lines you have to learn. It's not the hardest deck. It doesn't give you the most skill expression, but it's fine. It puts up strong boards. It has a decent room for non-engine, not the greatest, but it's okay. It's just a very clear third best deck, I think. It's even been putting up higher numbers than Tenpai at some point, but I just don't think it's as meta defining as Tenpai. Rescue Ace I personally don't love. It's okay. Sprites are like way here. Don't really see Spright having the most oomph to really beat those decks. In Runick Spright decks, the Spright cards are still pretty good. In Pure, they don't do enough anymore. Unchained is like right around here. It's fitting that I'm putting it next to Yubel because there is a version that plays both together, and that's also solid. I personally don't think Unchained is that great. It's worth noting that Nico and Daniel Hartmann have been putting up some results with it, which is cool to see. I do really like Unchained. At the same time, those were smaller regional results, right? So that's pretty much exactly representing the tier that I'm putting it in, right? And then we got Vanquish Soul, which to me is the definition of this tier. If you play Shifter, it's probably not worse than Kashtira, though. Vanquish Soul's okay. If I had to rank the Shifter decks in themselves, I would say Flu, then Vanquish, then Cash, and then the other Shifter decks. Actually, I think I like this the most. This spread, I think I can get behind. I think I would play Flu and Vanquish Soul definitely before I would play Kashtira. And now we're putting Ashened here for everyone who is scrolling all the way to the back of the video, skipping the entire tier list, and then they're gonna be like, what the hell, why is Ashened meta defining? And then they're gonna scramble and go back through the entire video to see what I said about Ashened and why it's so good. Outplayed. Whenever I do these, there's a lot of people in the Twitch chat and the comments who slightly disagree about certain decks. They say like that, this should be a little bit higher. What do you mean this deck doesn't have potential? It's straight up bad or it's straight up good. This is my first impression. There's a lot of decks on here that I have only barely seen in action, only looked at in theory, not played much myself, and take it with a grain of salt. That's why it's always important to listen to what I'm saying when I talk about those decks, because if I put a deck in potential because I don't know that much about it and I think it could do well, I'll tell you that, right? I hope you find this helpful in your decisions to prepare your decks for your upcoming tournaments, locals, regionals, nationals, whatever it may be. Let me know what you think of the list in the comments down below. Once again, feel free to ask me for any sort of deck that I haven't included. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to comment, like, and subscribe, all that stuff to support the channel. Appreciate you for watching and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye bye, YouTube. Opinion on Vanadium? Opinion on Baron Ban? Question mark.